They say the strangest part of a storm isn't the thunder or even the lightning, but the hush that comes just before the sky splits open. A silence so sharp it feels like the air is holding its breath. That's exactly how it felt that afternoon, in a quiet suburban street where the smell of barbecue drifted through the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of freshly cut grass and jasmine hedges swaying in the breeze. And before I dive deeper into this story, let me pause to tell you this. If you've ever believed that ordinary moments, family cookouts, backyard laughter, neighbors exchanging smiles, should never be poisoned by suspicion or prejudice, then like this story, share it, and subscribe for more truths wrapped in tales, because what you're about to hear deserves to echo beyond one backyard. It began on the Johnsons' lawn, the kind of emerald green patchwork that looked as though it had been cared for with the same devotion people usually reserve for raising children. And in many ways, it had, because Darnell Johnson, the head of the family, believed in the sacredness of gathering. His grill was not just metal and fire, but a symbol, a stage upon which he rehearsed the rituals his father taught him. Seasoned ribs smoked until tender, chicken wings brushed with a sticky glaze, corn charred to perfection, and laughter rising like smoke into the warm sky. By 3 o'clock that Saturday, the place was alive. Children zigzagged between lawn chairs, darting under the shade of the maple tree, shrieking when chased by cousins wielding water balloons. Aunt Brenda was already 2 stories deep about her coworker drama, punctuating each sentence with wide gestures and a plastic cup of sweet tea. Marvin Gaye's voice floated from a Bluetooth speaker near the porch, smooth and unbothered, crooning about mercy, mercy me, and neighbors passing by slowed just enough to glimpse the kind of joy that is both ordinary and enviable. I stood near the hedges, watching how sunlight gilded the scene, the kind of moment that made you believe peace could be permanent if only people left it alone. But peace is fragile when it brushes against the thin glass of prejudice. And on this street, the glass was already cracking. The first crack came with the slam of a sliding door across the fence line, sharp enough to slice through the music. Karen Whitfield emerged on her patio, lips pursed, clutching her phone like a weapon, scanning the Johnsons' yard with the same expression a TSA agent reserves for suspicious items. She was in her late 50s, hair a perfect helmet of blonde streaks, robe tied tight, as though to shield her from contamination. Her eyes narrowed, not just at the smoke rising from the grill, but at the bodies, black bodies, moving freely, laughing, owning space she had quietly decided wasn't meant for them. She lingered at the fence, first muttering complaints to herself, then louder, sharp enough for anyone within 10 feet to catch. Some of us actually like peace and quiet on weekends. Some of us don't need a circus in the neighborhood. A cousin laughed it off at first, rolling his eyes, but I felt it. The shift, the silence before the storm. Guests glanced toward her, their smiles faltering, the music suddenly feeling too loud, the laughter too conspicuous. The Johnson children stopped their chase mid-run, confused by the interruption, clinging to their parents' legs as though instinctively aware that joy can be stolen by a glare. Karen raised her phone higher, her voice dripping with that syrupy condescension that barely hides contempt. If this doesn't stop right now, I'll be calling the police. Noise ordinance, public disturbance, and Lord knows what else you all are up to. Her words weren't just complaints. They carried the weight of centuries, the historical shadow of white voices summoning authority to police black existence. And in that moment, the air grew heavy, the barbecue smoke turning into something thicker, tighter, almost suffocating. People exchanged glances. Quiet but fearful, because everyone had seen this script before, its endings always precarious. Someone whispered, "Keep recording." And 3 phones were lifted discreetly, capturing angles of Karen pacing by the fence, muttering about standards and law and order. A teenage girl live-streamed to Instagram, her caption already loaded with fire emojis and disbelief. She really about to call the cops over ribs. The comments poured in instantly, digital witnesses adding weight to the moment, because documentation had become both shield and sword. Still, the unease spread like ripples, each guest adjusting their posture, wondering if the evening would collapse into sirens and flashing lights. Karen's finger hovered above her phone screen, a theatrical pause, like she wanted her threat to marinate. "Last chance," she hissed, "or I'm dialing." But here's what Karen didn't know, what none of us realized until the very last moment. The Johnson story wasn't going to end like the others we'd read about in grim headlines. No, this gathering had its own twist waiting just beyond the smoke, one that would silence the storm before it could break. The air quivered with a kind of expectant tension, like the drawn bowstring of a violin waiting to snap, and all eyes shifted toward Darnell Johnson, the man at the center of the storm, apron still dusted with seasoning, tongs dangling loosely in one hand, his face calm in a way that felt both deliberate and defiant. He didn't raise his voice, didn't meet Karen's theatrics with equal fire, but instead exhaled slowly, as though measuring the exact length of patience left inside him, and then set the tongs down carefully on the side of the grill, as though refusing to let rage turn a family meal into a battlefield. He stepped forward, each stride deliberate, the kind of walk that said he had nothing to prove but wouldn't allow dignity to be stolen either. Karen's eyes narrowed further as she watched him approach, and she clutched her phone like it was both shield and sword, a performance designed for witnesses. The neighbors across the street who had cracked their blinds, the unseen audience of social media, where the teenager's live stream was already gathering viewers like moths to flame. "Don't take another step," Karen snapped, her voice high-pitched, brittle with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the power in that moment. "This is harassment, and if you think you can intimidate me, you've got another thing coming. One more word out of you, and I swear I'll hit this call button and let the police sort it out." Gasps rippled softly through the crowd of guests, children retreating toward the safety of their parents' legs, uncles exchanging looks that carried both anger and weary familiarity, because every black man in that yard knew how fast the accusation of intimidation could morph into something deadly once authorities were summoned. Darnell stopped just shy of the fence line, close enough for Karen to hear him clearly, far enough that no one could accuse him of violating her space. His voice, when it came, was low, steady, almost clinical in its calm. "Karen," he said, using her name with a firmness that startled her, like a teacher snapping a classroom back to order. "You need to put that phone down. Nobody here is breaking any laws. Nobody here is threatening you. We're in our own yard, enjoying food with our family. You know that." His tone wasn't pleading. It was factual, unyielding, the tone of a man accustomed to stating truth even when people didn't want to hear it. But Karen wasn't looking for truth. She wanted control. "Don't you lecture me about the law," she shot back, her voice dripping disdain. "I know exactly how this looks. Noise, smoke, trespassing, your friends parking wherever they feel like. It's unsanitary, it's dangerous, and frankly, it's suspicious. I don't care how calm you pretend to be. You people don't belong acting like this is some block party." The words landed like stones, ugly in their plainness, and the guests bristled, jaws tightening, eyes narrowing. Someone muttered, "Wow," under their breath, and the teenage live streamer zoomed in tighter on Karen's face, the comment section exploding with disbelief. "Your people? This is wild." She really said that. Still, Darnell didn't flinch. Instead, he reached slowly, deliberately, toward the side pocket of his apron. For a split second, every muscle in the yard tensed, because history had taught them what could be imagined in that motion, how easily it could be misread. But what emerged wasn't a weapon, wasn't even the spatula everyone expected. It was a small, leather-bound case, worn at the edges from years of use. Darnell opened it with quiet precision and held it up, angled so that both Karen and the cameras recording could see the glint of silver inside. A badge, not a novelty, not a toy, not something bought online, but the official insignia of the city's Metropolitan Police Department, his name and rank engraved beside it. Detective Sergeant Darnell Johnson. The yard fell silent, not the tense silence of fear, but the stunned silence of a plot twisting so sharply it forced everyone to recalibrate. Karen's eyes widened, her face draining of color as though the blood itself had retreated from her cheeks. For a moment, she simply froze, phone hovering in midair, caught between indignation and the dawning horror that her narrative had just unraveled in front of an audience. You're a cop?" she stammered, the confidence leaking out of her voice like air from a punctured balloon. Darnell didn't move closer, didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He simply held her gaze with a calmness that now carried the unmistakable authority of a man who'd spent 2 decades enforcing law and order. I am, he confirmed, his words cutting clean through the tension. And I'll remind you again, no laws are being broken here. We're not trespassing. We're not disturbing the peace. We're celebrating with our family on our own property. You threaten to weaponize the badge I carry every day against the very community I serve. Karen blinked rapidly, mouth opening and closing, searching for some defense, some scaffolding to rebuild her crumbling control. Well, I didn't know, she sputtered finally, her voice pitching higher with panic. How was I supposed to know you were that? The pause before the word betrayed her, the careful editing of the thought she didn't dare finish in front of the rolling cameras. That's the point, Darnell replied evenly, his tone still calm, but carrying the weight of something deeper. You didn't care to know. You assumed. You assumed we were trouble. You assumed we didn't belong. And you were ready to call in force to prove yourself right. Behind him, murmurs of agreement rose from the guests, some nodding, others folding their arms as if finally exhaling the frustration they had held in. Karen's hand trembled as she lowered the phone slightly, but she was still fighting, still unwilling to surrender the last scraps of her imagined authority. I just wanted peace and quiet, she muttered, voice small now, stripped of venom. Darnell closed the case and slipped it back into his apron pocket, his movements as deliberate as before, then addressed not just Karen but the gathering, his voice pitched to carry over the hum of the live stream, still running. Let me make something clear, he said, each syllable steady, carrying the resonance of a man used to being heard. This right here, is why trust gets broken. My uniform doesn't shield me from being misjudged in my own yard. My badge doesn't erase your assumptions. But no family should ever need a badge to prove they belong in their own neighborhood. And if you're recording, I hope you keep rolling, because this isn't just about me. It's about every family that's had to prove their innocence just to exist. For a beat, the yard was still, the air heavy with the weight of his words. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Within seconds, the entire yard echoed with applause, voices rising, affirmations spilling into the space where fear had lived only moments before. Karen shrank back toward her patio, phone limp at her side, the storm she'd summoned dissipating into an embarrassing drizzle. But the internet had already claimed the moment. The reveal, the badge, the words spoken with calm authority. The live stream comments scrolled faster than anyone could read. Legend. Protect this man. She picked the wrong family today. And though the smoke from the grill still curled into the sky, what lingered in the air now was something different. Not fear, not suspicion, but the beginning of a reckoning that would stretch far beyond the edges of that backyard fence. The video was still streaming when Karen slipped back into her house, her blinds snapping shut like eyelids forced closed against a truth too bright to face. But the moment had already outrun her retreat. It was out there now, alive, multiplying across screens, passed from hand to hand in digital whispers that grew into shouts, hashtags blooming like wildflowers after a storm. By the time the last of the barbecue smoke drifted skyward, clips of Darnell calmly revealing his badge had racked up thousands of views, then tens of thousands, then headlines flashing across feeds. White neighbor calls cops on black barbecue, until the host flashes his own badge. Comment sections became digital campfires, strangers gathering to dissect the scene, some with outrage, some with awe, many with the weary recognition of people who had seen too many stories without this kind of twist. Yet for those of us in the yard, the transformation was more immediate, more visceral. Fear had dissolved, replaced by something that felt almost like relief, but heavier, weighted with the knowledge that this time the ending had bent differently, but only because chance had armed Darnell with authority society recognized. I remember how the guests settled back into their chairs, cautiously at first, like animals testing the air after a predator has gone. Then louder, freer. The music turned back up, ribs passed around again, laughter stitched back together with shaky hands, children resuming their games as though reclaiming the afternoon from the edge of ruin. But underneath the laughter ran a current of reflection. Quiet conversations sparked in corners. What if he hadn't been a cop? One aunt whispered, clutching her glass. What if she had dialed before he showed it? Murmured another. The questions hovered like smoke, impossible to wave away. Darnell moved among them with that same calm, thanking cousins for their support, helping his youngest niece with her plate, all while carrying himself with the weight of someone who knew his personal victory was never just personal. It was communal, symbolic, and therefore both triumph and burden. Later, as twilight deepened and fireflies began their blinking dance, his words at the fence replayed in my head like an echo with no walls to stop it. No family should ever need a badge to prove they belong. That sentence spread online faster than the reveal itself, quoted in tweets, stitched into TikToks, painted on cardboard signs by Monday afternoon when a small crowd gathered in front of City Hall, holding up their phones to replay the clip for officials who claimed not to understand. And in the days that followed, the ripple widened. Local news anchors dissected the confrontation frame by frame. Experts invited onto panels to discuss implicit bias. Neighborhood associations forced to answer uncomfortable questions about how community standards were too often wielded as camouflage for prejudice. By Wednesday, the mayor's office had issued a statement announcing a new initiative, Community Bias Awareness Workshops, adapted from the very police training programs Darnell had helped design, but this time open to the public, starting in Karen's neighborhood, as if to prove the lesson would not go ignored. Darnell, reluctant at first, was pushed into the spotlight, asked to lead, to speak, to teach, his calmness now rebranded as wisdom, his restraint as leadership. Yet I knew, and those who had been in that yard knew, that what gave his words power wasn't just his badge, but the clarity of a truth rooted in experience, a truth sharpened by years of navigating suspicion and spaces where his authority had been invisible until he displayed it. At the next Saturday's workshop, neighbors filled folding chairs in the community center, some leaning forward, eager, others stiff with defensiveness, and Darnell stood before them without a grill, without music, without the easy backdrop of family joy, just a man with a badge in one pocket and a truth in the other. I didn't ask for that moment. He told them, his voice steady, but I won't let it go to waste. Because if you needed to see a badge to treat my family with respect, then the problem isn't me. It's us. The silence that followed was different from the hush of the storm. It was the silence of people listening, even those who wished they weren't. And back on our block, change unfolded in smaller, quieter ways. A week later, neighbors who had once walked past the Johnsons with curt nods stopped to linger, to taste a plate of ribs, to let their children run across lawns without invisible fences. Karen, still hidden behind her curtains, became less the story than the mirror she'd held up, a mirror no one could deny seeing themselves in. And the Johnson backyard? It grew louder, freer, brighter, a place no longer shadowed by fear, but claimed fully as space for joy, for resilience, for gathering. When I think of that summer now, I don't just remember the badge or the confrontation. I remember the transformation, a neighborhood forced to reckon, a city choosing reform, an ordinary backyard cookout becoming the spark for extraordinary reflection. And I think about Darnell, apron back around his waist, tongs in hand, smiling faintly as he turned ribs on the grill while the sound of children laughing swelled behind him, his posture relaxed but his eyes carrying that familiar weight. Because he knew, and we all knew, that the work wasn't finished, that storms would come again, in different yards, on different streets, but that this time, at least, the air had shifted. And sometimes, that's how change begins, not with thunder or lightning, but with a single man standing calmly at the fence line, holding up truth until the storm loses its power.